I saw a question the other day on how to use force fields. In the particle brushes. In fact, you see that here when you have the brush tool selected and you click on particles. And I've shown that a few times, but maybe not in a whole lot of detail. So I want to explore that a little bit more. Force fields currently are enabled in the particle brush, and I'm using here version 8.2-ish, sort of an alpha currently under development. You may see some differences in the interface. The old interface had a button for the fog and another one, FF, for force field. And so there's something new also in this one here. When you click on that, there is an additional mode. So there used to be 3 modes for the force field style, if you want, or technique or algorithm. And now there's 4, the new one here being the slope. All right, so let's see how that works. Right now I have the force field. If I close that, it's still there, but you cannot change it. And you really need to uncheck that button to turn it off. Okay, or if you start the force field, one thing you can also do is you can free the force field right there. But either way, you want to uncheck. This is the starting point, and so what is the force field? If you enable the particles and you don't have a force field enabled, default particles will behave like this. It's a little bit slow right now because I'm also doing some rendering on the background. Let me go change the priority on that rendering task that I'm doing in my 3D program, and then that way what I'm doing here is going to be a little bit smoother. I'll be right back. So here I am in my task manager. You see I'm running at full 100% on the CPUs because I'm doing some rendering in my 3D program, which is Carrara, and I'm doing a little animation on some terrains again. So what I'm going to do is select the processes here. Where is it? Carrara at the top, right? You can sort that by CPU consumption, and that should be Carrara right now. There you go. Right click that, and what I'll do is I'll set the priority to a little bit lower, below normal, so that it's really getting the CPU only when nothing else is asking for it. And so it's running this a little bit more in the background. It won't impact the recording that I'm doing with Dog Waffle. It won't impact the other activity in the program itself. So Dog Waffle is a little bit more responsive and the recording will be smoother. Alright, so back in this here. So we have the particles rendering like this. That they're falling down because gravity is pulling them down. That's one force that we have in the setting itself here. Alright, so if I turn that off, it will not fall down, and it will also not go very far unless we increase the lifespan. So I'm going to give it 123 here, and you see now that these pine cones, or whatever you want to call them, are shooting out a little bit longer. You can change the color. Let's make them green. There you go. They're coming in tufts, right? They're appearing, and then it seems like we don't have a continuous stream of them, because once all of them are on, it takes a while for them to die off. And sometimes what you'll want to do is increase how many of them can be active at the same time. If I go about 2,000, it might be a little bit more of a continuous stream, because there is enough more that can be enabled that it keeps shooting, and then by the time before we reach the 2000, we have already reached the end of the lifespan for a few of them, and so it keeps generating new ones without any interruption. And you can also reduce the particle emission, the number of particles, so it's a little bit sparser, and that definitely also will help in getting a continuous stream. But the key point here is that the particles are not hindered or not affected by anything. Now, even if I put a image in the background, let's say I render a grid, something like a brick texture, or let's say where's the other one? There's a grid here. If I render a grid, here's the grid size, and here's the thickness of these lines, and then maybe I'll change the color to black initially, or something different. Let's give it a red, but a dark red. All right, so that color right now that grid is there, but it's not affecting anything. The particles go unhindered on top of it, right? So undo that. Now I'm going to store this image because I probably will have a need for that again and again. So I'm going to store this image quickly so I have a quick snapshot copy. So when I do some changes here and I'm done and I want to go back to the original with the grid, I just click here on the grid, right? The stored image helps you quickly go back to that stored copy. All right, so back to this, the force field now. What do? Well, you click the force field, and the moment it does that, it looks at, it takes this image, and it analyzes it and turns it into a force field. It's basically a gradient that affects, similar to the gravity, affects which way the particles go. So if I draw this now, you see that it's now doing something very different. It's lining up against these lines, right? They kind of get caught into that. And the beauty of it is that you don't even have to have that grid there anymore. You can clear that. The force field has been captured, or the image has been captured and the force field has been produced, and so it's there in effect now, and you can now paint kind of into a magic ghost image behind it. The other thing too is that you can, if you want to prevent it from going into these insides of the squares altogether, one thing you could do is you could take that image initially here and load that into the selection mask. One way to do, there's two ways to do that. One is you can go to the image menu and first copy it to the swap buffer, and then you can go from the swap buffer again here in the image menu, and under the alpha menu, copy swap buffer to the alpha. So now you have the traditional marching ants lines going along there and showing you where the selection is. Now, is it on the dark grids or is it on the squares? Well, you'll find out when you paint, and it looks like it's actually not painting inside the dark grids. It looks like that's masked off, and where it is painting is on the inside. That's not what I wanted. I wanted the opposite of that. So what I should do is actually invert the selection, right? So if I go to the selection menu and invert it, now I can prevent it from rendering in anything that's the white squares, and it's just rendering inside those boxes. Now, another way, I said there were two ways to get this image into the alpha channel. Let me go clear this and we'll see that again. So when we start from that, another convenient way to do that is to actually go to the selection and pretend there already is a selection, even though there isn't any. You can always store the alpha, and if there is nothing, well, there is nothing. I mean, the entire image is selected by default, and but what you can do now is say get buffer, and that doesn't put it quite yet into the alpha channel, right? It grabs it, it gets the image buffer, it gets the buffer, and puts it into the stored copy as a grayscale, as if it was a snapshot of the alpha channel. But guess what? Once you have it stored there, you can go here and click replace, and that puts it back in there. You can also invert it here before you do that and replace it, and now you actually have the version you want, which is black, meaning not selected on those squares, and bright, not totally white, but bright enough on the lines of the grid. Now, another thing you could do here is perhaps you don't want to see the particles rendered in the squares, but you want them a little bit along the edges. So one thing you could do is blur the transition from selected to not selected, because remember the selection you have here, it's showing a grid pattern of totally non-selected to somewhat or totally selected. It's actually not completely white, and we may need to adjust that a little bit. So one thing I would do is go to the selection mask and let's see, adjust alpha, and so here it will, as you move that, it will show you a black and white or a grayscale rendering of the selection mask, the value in the alpha channel. And so with that, you can go and increase the contrast to have a much brighter white area here, and that means now a fully selected area. So if you get the alpha into the stored copy, get the alpha, you now see a high bright contrast between white and black. And so with that, if I make that selection blurry, let's go with the box filter alpha, for instance, and show the alpha value. Not that much blurriness, but if you see this blurriness here allows you to get a little bit transition. In fact, you see kind of a curve on those marching ants, and if you do that blur again, maybe perhaps with the alpha. In fact, let's enable the alpha overlay, so you kind of see how the pink is on the non-selected parts, and it kind of blurs over there a little bit. I'm going to now go to the selection and get the Gaussian blur alpha, and in that mode, it's very subtle. It's not very high contrasting, but so that's where you may want to go back into the adjust one more time and adjust the alpha for even more contrast. So you can give it a nice round appearance, and that will give you something to channel the particles in. So the particles can actually go inside the grid path. Let's say we can perhaps go like so. That's a little bit too much. What I'm trying to do is get something like almost like ovals in there. There you go. That's a little bit too much. More contrast. There you go. Okay, something like so. So the particles are allowed to navigate between, but not in the middle of these squares. Right, and so as I'm drawing now, you see the particles can go, and they're kind of contained inside through that force field, but also through the alpha channel. It's kind of a trick I'm playing with both together. The force field allows it to go anywhere, but it is adjusted, it is controlled by the force field. It doesn't go really into the square centers that much. And then on top of that, I totally prevent it from actually going into the square center by placing a mask there with the alpha channel. That's just a little other trick there to kind of separate the two parts, right? Where you are allowed to draw and where you're not. So if you totally clear the alpha channel, if you get rid of that, then you could have actually some of these particles draw over it, but they will be quickly channeled back into the center of the force field. And now, so the question is, how do you get that force field to really contain it there? We started initially with that grid pattern, right? That was this one. We clicked on force field, it grabbed it, and what you can do now, you can look at the force field interface here, and you can actually change how much force it applies. And if you have nothing, if you have no force drag and no force, no power to it, the particles go just unhindered, just like before, right? Like when we didn't have any any force. And if you have a gravity, let's put gravity back in there, 0.5. The gravity will pull it down, right? But the moment you give it a little bit of power there, you'll see that something really weird is going to happen. It's going to deflect it at times. And then on top of that, if you add a little bit of drag, it's going to start adjusting it even more. So the question now is, how much do you need? And that really depends a little bit on the image, the gradient, the grayscale value there, the amount of the structure of the image, and also on how much drag you're giving it. And so here's where you can explore and find really a lot of very interesting, very different appearances, very different effects based on also the style. Let's say if you give it a shrinking line that starts a little bit thicker, right? And you have very slow speed, but long lifespan. So you'll see these particles move quite a long while. Let's give it something like gravity, also not too much, 0.1 or 0.2, and initial speed at 1 and final speed at 3. So it's not going very far, right? And perhaps we can give it a little bit more force field. There you go. So that's even better. That will really kind of keep it out for the most part anyway from the squares. And so you can play with these parameters and see where that force field comes to affect the image the way you want it. All right, so this was an example where we started with just a grid pattern, and if I go with a very fine size and maybe a bigger, a stronger power and less force drag, there's another scenario. Let's start with a black color now, erase to black. And it still has that force field, right? So that got separated. And you have some new forms and new shapes that you can create with that. Look at that. Very different. Right? Who would have thought this was just a square pattern behind it like that initially? And you can tell where the force field is coming into play here. Right? So let's see what else can we do. What can we use these force fields for? First of all, there is a new force mode, the slope. And that will have a different effect, right? If you look at that, and then you look at the hue, that's yet another one. Now the hue, there isn't really much color to go for here, so it's finding it and just going in that direction. It doesn't have any changes in the hue because I only have a monocolor situation. We'll have to load a different image to see that one work. This one here is the value. That one's interesting too because the brightness basically has an influence here, and we can have all sorts of different side effects from that. Let's make the lines a little bit thicker here. Okay. There's also All right, so now let's take a different image. Let's take an image where we actually have a variety of color. And one thing I would recommend is the render plasma noise. And in the plasma noise, you can try either this one, the black and white, or the grayscale. But there's another one also, which is the YUV or the RGB. And when you do those, you have changes in color, right? So that means that the hue will be indeed should have an effect. For the force field. The hue analysis on the force field should have an effect, and sure enough, so if you go like this, now right now it doesn't do it because it still is working on the force field from that original grid. We need to free this and clear it and then get a new one. So let's go and undo this. So we have this image. Let's store this image like we did before because we might want to get back to it. We're probably done with this one, but I'll just keep it aside for now. And so here we go. This image and create a force field. Click on that, and so as it's analyzed this, we can now go and paint, and we can see that these particles are indeed very different in the way they go without the force field. Without the force field, this is what it would do, right? It just goes down, and maybe it uses the mouse velocity as we see here a little bit, so it moves around, changes direction based on how quickly I move. I can get rid of that, and now it's just totally gravity pulling it down. And if I get rid of that as well, it's just doing this again, right? So unhindered, just going over that image. And the moment I enable the power a little bit, it starts deflecting it. So you can see there is a force field there. And so that force field, you know, you can use that for many different things. If, for instance, you want to enable, you want to draw something like a printed circuit board, very stylized, not a real one, but something that you've seen printed circuit boards where things go along in different angles and overlap, and you see some, well, that looks kind of techno, so you can create some sort of really fancy patterns with that. There's other ways to use that, and you'll see all sorts of different effects as you use the power or the force drag. And some of these you might find really useful to create kind of gnarly roots, like root systems that are affected, that are like curled up. And in fact, for that, you'll probably want to change the color of your gradient. So, perhaps a little bit more red and less blue. Let's get rid of the blue here. Some green, but especially reddish, so that kind of has kind of root colors. Maybe darker. So bring the darkness here, and even less green. And less less blue. All right, so essentially, that you combine also with the where's the more option here? That's the age decrement. So the roots get smaller and smaller over time, and you see that happening right now here. All right, so that's another way to combine it with the force field. But let's explore some more of these force fields. There is this image here that we used has a lot of hue changes, and therefore if we go into the hue mode, it will also reflect and deflect. It will also use that. So here's another way to use it, and in fact I'll reduce a little bit, perhaps the maximum number of particles. Still too many here. Let's try 55, very few. Yeah, that's going to be going back into this chunkiness here. I want to have a continuous stream, so let's give them that. There is the value, right? And so all of these here will have some amount of deflection, especially if there are changes in color. You should see that also in the hue mode. Here's the slope, that's yet another one. And so the slope is the new one that we're currently implementing for version 8.2. It's in alpha, who knows what the name will be in the end. By the time we release it, that might still change, but let's call it that for lack of a better name right now. So you have the contour mode, and let's do one more example. Let's take a picture, perhaps a face, or like a 3D rendering of somebody's head, and let me go look for that. Say for instance here I go into Anime Studio and I do a quick test render of one of the characters. And I'll take that into Dog Waffle as an image. So let me go and print screen. There you go. And then Alt back to Dog Waffle. And I'll go and simply load that as an image through the clipboard. Right. Control V, paste new image, and we can get rid of the old one. There's the image. Now we need to probably get rid of some of the window decorations. Let's go and grab the selection mask here. We just want the head, about this much of it. There you go. Alright, and crop to that selection. There you go. So let's store that image, and we can use that now as a force field. So let's go free the force field, close this, uncheck that, recheck it, and so now it's grabbed that image and uses this image as a force field. Right, and so we can go and start painting. Right, let's go paint with the particle brushes, and you'll see some deflections now, and I'm gonna make it very hairy, a little bit of randomness there, randomize values a little bit there. Right, but hopefully we'll get that force field to, or that shape to show us some we need to reduce the this one here back to 0 because it's disappearing too fast. There you go. And of course we want different colors for this one. So there you go. Alright, so now as I'm painting over this, you can tell that there's a face underneath it, the force field of that face. Alright, let's make it perhaps even thinner if I can. Yep. And what else could we change here? Get the different color, and of course the style. So let's experiment with that. So we got the contour, and we want it strong, but we also want a lot of force drag. So let's do that. Oh, that looks cool. Look at that. This is how you can use that to have that image become a deflector. You know, it's deflecting the particles, and they end up being kind of associating or surrounding or coming close to the original image, and so you can tell a little bit better what's going on there. You know, here's the original image, and then when you erase and paint over that with that force field from that original image, you can tell it's kind of a ghost image appearing there. Alright, let's see another example. I mean, you could keep that image there still at the same time if you want to, right? Or you could reduce the power and just have a little bit of force drag and make it very subtle. Let's go and erase to that. Maybe erase it back to white. Let's, oops, that's not what I wanted. Let's keep it white. There you go. And so just loosely paint over that, and you'll see gradually the face around appearing there. I'm just dragging around here with my mouse. Give it perhaps a little bit more randomness initially, and also initial velocity. Let's give it 4 and up to 8, so that it's going a little bit stronger and fast, and we do need a little bit more power and more force drag to kind of control it there. So there you go. Alright, so that's the one with the contour. And if we don't want the contour, one thing you could use is that new one, the slope, and that will have a nice effect here too. Look at that. Alright, so let's generate them all. Let's go first with the contour and then store that, right? So we go loosely around that. I'm going to do just one brush stroke. This is just one brush stroke, and then I'm going to do a replay of that, re-render of that brush stroke. Go around the eyes. There you go. So this one brush stroke, I'm done. And what I'll do is I'll store this image, and just to test it, I'll erase and do a Shift A. Yep, that brush stroke is still there in memory. It remembers a lot of positions on that brush stroke. Oh, maybe it didn't remember them all. No, I think it's still rendering. But once it's done, it will have re-rendered that entire brush stroke. But of course everything looks different because we got some randomization. These particles are shot out again. That's done with Shift A, by the way. I don't know if you've used that command. Shift A for again. It's replay again the most recent brush stroke, and there it is. So we've got another one. We can store that one, and then we'll switch over to the other mode, the slope mode, and we'll just do a Shift A again. Just make sure that your keyboard focus is on. let's see, erase this and then Shift A, that your keyboard focus is on the main application, because sometimes these plugins will capture that away and they won't actually see the update, they won't see the Shift A shortcut if it is if the keyboard focus is on that other plugin. So you want to make sure that you click on like the window menu here, or on a gray area, that you don't want to click on the inside of the image, because that will be seen as the start of a new brush stroke. Right. Okay, well, but here's the one with the slope, and you can tell that, you know, wherever the shape was, it didn't paint so much, and so that's perfect. Let's go store that, and let's do one more with the hue. Now there are some colors in the original, as we can see here, right? So we should probably see a little bit of a presence of the hue there too. Let's do a Shift A again. Yeah, there's something happening, but it's quite different, because it's not the type of, you know, the random colors, not many color changes as we saw in the case of the noise pattern, the fractal noise. This one here has, you know, being an anime character, there's only a few colors. A cartoon characters, basically there's only going to be a few colors, so the hue change is not going to be that dramatic. But it's still rendering, it's still going on, it's a very long brush stroke. There you go. Alright, so we got this one. This one is probably not our favorite for now. Let's go and store that nonetheless, and store image, and oops, there you go. Alright, so we got this one, that's the hue. This one is the new mode, the slope. This one is the first one. There was the contour, and we got one more, which is the value. Alright, so let's go erase and Shift A one more time. And that one too will take a little while, because again, it's a very long brush stroke that I did, and I just wanted it to kind of repaint the same brush stroke, and then we can do a side-by-side comparison of those 4 different ways that the force field can modify the original image. Almost looks like a horse here. Alright, so this one's done. Let's go and free the force. Well, you know what, you never know, we might want to use it a little bit more. But so let's not free it quite yet, but let's store this image and do a side-by-side comparison. So we got this one. Let's move this out. We've got this one here. Let's make it a little bit bigger, like so. We've got this one here. And this one is probably my favorite. And guess what? That's the new one. That's probably going to be in 8.2. It's currently under beta. And so that one's there. And then there's this one, and that one's really cool too. And so here are some examples of force fields from that original anime character that I grabbed. And so you can take your own photograph, take a picture of your hand, you know, and put that hand there, and then start painting around it with the particle brushes using that force field to see some very different styles. And hopefully that will give you some more ideas of things to try with Project Dogwaffle. The force field, which was introduced in version 4. I think you need version 4 or 4.1, which is a free upgrade for version 4. But of course, that's long ago. That's about 5 years, 6 years ago. Now we're at version 8, and I highly encourage you to at least get version 6, which is in November of 2012, offered for just $10. Great offer there. So have fun waffling and painting with particles. Thanks for watching.